Hi, SUPERSTAT. This is Odie. I am here to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in the world today. Just as we approach summer, we're all going to kind of reach this point where we're like, I've got 2 weeks till vacation. I've got 4 days till vacation. If you plan on going somewhere kind of like I do, my plan is to go to Norway. I already double checked, got my no vaccinations needed, a safe place to travel. As of now, we haven't tried to take it over yet, but if you are traveling, I've got a couple considerations for you. So tonight, I'm going to kind of dive into a little bit behind some of those infections that uh, you might encounter on your trip to wherever you're going to some fun destination. So tonight we will talk about infections of leisure. As you are traveling, I picked out a couple fun things to talk about. So this is going to be a little bit of a longer episode, but hang in there. It's going to be worth it. By the end of it, you'll have a couple great tips, and I'll reference a couple other great resources along the way and great podcasts that you can kind of tune into along with ours. So kind of let's get into it. I do rhyme a little bit in this, so you're going to have to hang in there for me. So like any place else, congratulations. You got the PTO, you get to go somewhere. All right. So what do we need to be really worried about? So we're going to talk about a couple pathogens. Some of them might be zoonotic, and you're like, ooh, what does that mean? Where they could be animal transmitted. But I'm going to pick up some things that compromise activities you might do that have roots in ancient origins, routine, and exotic. And so I'll touch on a couple things when I'm talking just about current things that you're hearing in the news that you might be worried about. But for the most part, I'm going to dive into some things that in your leisure, if you're doing a staycation or if you're actually going somewhere that you might kind of encounter. So things to kind of keep in mind. And then even because we are in the laboratory and some of you have been in microbiology for a while. So if you are a chemist or if you're just an eager hematologist or if you're just one of our normal run-of-the-mill wonderful people that listens to our podcast that is a musician or all of the above. I have a couple fun things that we do in the laboratory for identification purposes. And of course, in superstat fashion, just in slow stat motion for this episode, you're going to walk away with a couple strategies and some practical tips. So here we go. Okay, so you have decided to go on your amazing journey. So some things that I want to kind of in this first part go over are some sports, some close contact, and some travel, and then even a pilgrimage. By the end of this, you kind of know where I'm going with that. So just a little bit of kind of a roadmap. So some things to kind of think about as you're traveling, building your differential diagnosis. It's kind of in the laboratory, we start thinking about, especially micro, where you've been, where you're going, what are some of the things that you could potentially catch along the way. So in the case of anything where you might get into an accident, you might fall, there might be a case of where you could potentially contract a bloodborne infection. Some things that we typically kind of think about in the lab and even just in our day-to-day work is going to be thinking about HIV infections, hepatitis B, hepatitis C. Some of these things can be contracted in some fun ways or just the run of the mill. So you got to kind of look out for some of these bloodborne pathogens. Then you got to kind of keep in mind skin infections. So this could be potentially viral. So you could get herpes simplex virus or some of the other viruses along the way. And I'll leave it at that since we are a wholesome podcast, but still science driven. So you have to consider things like HPV and other things as well. And then skin infections, if you're somebody that's mountain bike riding or in the gym or you're going to be zip lining or that kind of thing, you have to kind of think about some of the things that can happen with like different skin infections as well. So, potentially you could get MRSA, you could have group A strep, so strep pyogenes, and that could be something that could be contracted in the skin. And so you've heard about some of those serious infections or even if you're like, yes, it's time for the hot tub, you got to kind of watch out for potentially Pseudomonas aeruginosa. So this 1 gram negative pathogen could show up, but still don't let it deter you from that hot tub time that you've worked so hard and earned. And then we've got some other infections as well that you have to be a little more aware of, especially with the fact that temperatures are actually getting a little warmer. You have to keep in mind that bugs are kind of everywhere. So if you are hiking like I was earlier this evening, things are getting warmer, so you have to watch out for ticks. You have to watch out for different mosquitoes that might carry things like West Nile. But luckily, you have us at SUPERSTAT to help you kind of think through some of these things and kind of help you diagnose some of these things. These are just a couple things I like to kind of, or you can think about that are kind of sports related that you could potentially contract. So usually I like to dive into a couple cases, but since we are all listening, um, the particular one case that I usually love to get into is dealing with gram-negative diplococci, especially Neisseria meningitidis. If you want to hear a whole wonderful series on gram-negative diplococci, make sure you tune into Let's Talk Micro. So Louise Plaza, a friend of our podcast, does an amazing job at covering gram-negative diplococci. So if you are a blood banker and you're like, ooh, I haven't done those in forever, he does an amazing job in a 4 to 5 part series on gram-negative diplococci. So Luis, if you're listening, hey, we are always shouting you out. So one of the bigger ones that we, in the laboratory, we're looking at this initial thing called a gram stain, which you guys all should be familiar with, but those little cocci are round and they are sometimes in little pairs, and they look like what they call kidney beans. So before this and before my time in the lab, I did not know what a kidney bean was. We are not kidney bean people in my family. We're a red meat and potato kind of family, or a Salisbury steak, TV dinner, $1.25 kind of family. If you want to learn more about those and see some great images, careful with what you Google. When we're in the laboratory at the gram stains. So we're looking for those grams, those particular organisms. But then we're also, we've got different media plates that we're using that kind of help us along the way to find some of these. So with our different gram-negative diplococci, a lot of these will grow just on our chocolate and our blood plate. So in microbiology, we've got, so for our gram-negative bacilli, so things like you've heard about E. coli, and those organisms grow on some special plates called McConkey, but these are kind of the special ones that just grow on 2 different plates, a special chocolate plate. So you can see these in like eyes. You can see these in, well, real genital sites and in respiratory in some cases. People can get colonized with some of these things. But in the laboratory, the reason why I bring up especially Neisseria meningitidis is going to be the fact that this can be laboratory acquired. So, and we'll talk about why this ties into infections of leisure, but you have to kind of keep in mind that potentially it's more infectious. You can see this in college kids that are going to the dorms that are going to be in close contact. So another reason why this Neisseria meningitidis is kind of relevant. Make sure you check out that series from Louise Plaza. So we grow this up in the laboratory. We're actually able to identify it. We take into consideration once we're identifying it that we need to confirm the method that we're identifying by, because with RNA series species, you have to be a little more aware, especially if it's one of the pathogenic ones like meningitis or gonorrhea that you've heard about. You want to make sure you got it right. You don't want to tell somebody they have gonorrhea or that they have meningitis, and you be like, "Oops, my bad." It's not like mixing up French fries and tater tots. This is a little bit more of a big deal here. So we do use all these biochemicals in the laboratory. So we look at what kinds of sugars they use. We use mass spectrometry. We use different quick panels as well. We use molecular methods. So that's our PCR to help us kind of identify quite a few of these things to make sure that to see if we have gonorrhea, or in this case for this topic, meningitis. And as you've got your high school student moving into college, and like my niece is moving into the dorm. So one of the vaccines that they recommend is for Neisseria meningitidis. So how all this, just to touch on a little bit of in the laboratory, we don't really do full antibiotic testing in these cases. We actually do like an abridged, we do a quick little kind of disc to see if we can use something like penicillin or not, or cephalosporins. That's another type of antibiotic that affects the cell wall of the organism. So we look to see if we're able to use some of these. And for Neisseria meningitidis, so your high school student who's now going to college that needs this vaccine, or like I mentioned earlier, laboratory worker who's working with this that potentially could contract this. So this could be laboratory acquired. We have to kind of keep in mind that there are cases where we actually have to worry about infection control. In this case, where we're notifying a group of people. So there are, outside the laboratory, there are some laboratory professionals that are in the business of actually trying to prevent and kind of control infections from spreading. So we're in the business of actually making sure that our patients have some antibiotics that work potentially, and that we can identify them and diagnose. So these are the people that we're shutting it down. So we have to call them and let them know. But then we also have to let our health department know as well. So in your state, you might have to call within a certain time frame, but the epidemiology has to do a little work on this particular organism just because it spreads so easily. It could be in dorms. But something that you probably haven't thought about is just the fact that Neisseria meningitidis is actually endemic. So that means it's just naturally kind of occurring in this region in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's actually a region, and it's called the meningitis belt, where there's a pilgrimage that actually people will travel through sub-Saharan Africa where they can potentially contract Neisseria meningitidis. So it's not just something that college kids can get in the dorm or close contact, but it's also something that potentially could be travel related. So if you're like, wow, okay, never thought of it that way. But so if you go to the CDC website, so if you are traveling to one of these areas, specifically Africa, during this time of this pilgrimage or for this pilgrimage, they highly recommend that you actually get vaccinated for Neisseria meningitidis. And there's going to be 2 vaccines that you have to get. Some of them cover different common stereotypes. So that's a whole different episode. And luckily, we've got a doctor amongst our group. We have Dr. Melody Boudreaux Nelson. So in a later episode, I'll have her dive into more logistics. But just besides Neisseria meningitidis, recently in the news, you probably have heard that there is an Ebola outbreak in the Congo. So in that particular region. So that's another reason the World Health Organization has issued an alert. So not only Neisseria meningitidis in this beltway that you have to be careful of, but you also have to currently we're dealing with a Ebola outbreak. World Health Organization has great information. Getting back to just for you in the laboratory for Neisseria meningitidis, if you are traveling or if you potentially have a patient that has this and you've been exposed to it, there's just a couple things to kind of protect yourself. So making sure that you're working under that biosafety cabinet. Anyone that has known me over time knows that I have quality and safety been kind of inducted into the Dan the Safety Man superheroes of lab quality and safety. So make sure that you are being safe and protecting yourself with protective gear. And then you will always see me get vaccines. If there's a vaccine for it and something preventative, and you're like, okay, it's not that bad, Aaron, you can actually go ahead and listen to a couple episodes. It's called This Podcast Will Kill Me. If there's more Aarons in the world, you're like, oh gosh, more Aarons. I'm like, yes, there's more Aarons. They go through some of the most common diseases that were occurring before vaccines, and you can hear about the historical accounts of what happened and the people that died from these. And if it still didn't change your mind, then I've done my work, and the other Aarons have done their work too if they have changed your mind. But anyways, okay. So some kind of practical tips for if you're going to be working out in the gym or if you're going to be traveling to some of these endemic areas. But just basically use, if you're going to a hotel gym or something, make sure you're washing your hands, you're wiping the equipment down, to using disinfectants. If there's any kind of exposure, making sure you go to your physician. And then immunization. So other things that you might do for your free time this summer, now that you actually have free time and your vacation has been approved. I keep saying that because I'm reminding myself, I'm like, yes, it's coming. Vacation's coming for all of us. But you have to kind of also think about that. If you're gardening or if you're doing international travel like I am, where I'm about to go to Norway and then hopefully, fingers crossed, still Peru if all goes according to plan. You have to kind of think about some of where you're going and what potentially also is there. And even when you're traveling, having your bag packed kind of with some appropriate stuff. So you might need to have the Pepto-Bismol tablets. You might need the antacids. You might need those kinds of things that potentially you can acquire some of these just things along the way as you're traveling. When I'm looking at gardening, there's a couple things that kind of come to mind. And the animals you might come across and those kinds of things. So with gardening, there's you have to think about like the soil and the plants. So this automatically pulls me into some of our mycology organisms. So some of the yeast and molds, and some of the ones I'm going to mention. I think that the top three I'll mention are going to be what are called dimorphic molds. So they're going to be yeast at the warmer temperature, and they're going to be mold-like in the lower temperature that's there. So things like Sporothrix, you can see that in gardeners, Demycosis, so Blastomyces, Histoplasma. These are going to be some of the ones that you're going to see that potentially with gardening and soil, and if you're going cave diving or something, you could potentially come across. But there's also going to be some parasites as well that we're going to be looking at. So Strongyloides is a common worm that you can potentially come across in the soil along with hookworms. So one thing with Strongyloides is it's a worm that potentially could be laboratory acquired as well. If you don't clean your area and you have a patient that has this, it's called threadworm, that potentially that could bore into your skin. And then even something like nocardia. So if you're a gardener, things to kind of keep in mind, but luckily your immune system will kind of keep things in play. So when you are traveling, or if you're spending time at home with your pets, you got to watch out for things like cat scratch fever, the fever. Yep, they're singing here. Pasteurella for like animal bites. And I did have a coworker that actually brought in her in-laws cat bit her, and she brought in and swabbed it and made it a unknown for a student. But you can see this is animal bites. But you also have to kind of worry about rabies as well, especially if you're petting those wild raccoons or anything. And a buddy of the podcast, Dr. Rodney Rohde, loves rabies. It's his favorite. And then around Halloween time, you're going to see him dress up as a zombie Rohde. So look out for that. He loves to post that around Halloween. There's also rat bite fever. So if you're playing with the rats, you got to watch out, they might bite you. But then even Lyme disease as well. So that's something with like the ticks that you kind of have to be on the lookout for. And if you're my niece, she loves Agar Levine. And so there was a long thing where she had a bout with Lyme disease. So there was a thing where they're like, is she still with us? Is she not? And so this is me at Christmas. I heard all about it. So you got to watch out with the animals that you're dealing with. And then even just traveling. If you're anything like me, I put my microbrain aside, but when I start going places, I start trying all sorts of food, and it might be from street carts or that kind of things. You got to kind of keep that in mind that potentially there are some kinds of E. coli. There's this thing called Campylobacter that is just the seagull bacteria that when we do our stains look like little gulls. So we usually tell students to watch out for the seagulls on the gram stain. But then things like Salmonella and Shigella. But in the news, you've been hearing a lot lately about cruises. So there's been a lot about Hantavirus in the news. And this is basically a case where we had people that were bird watching in an area with rats in the area, contracted it, brought it on the boat. So this isn't something that you typically get. It's all the time. It's not going to be the next pandemic. So don't let the news scare you. If you continually hear the experts say, this is not the next pandemic, it is not the next pandemic. So with that in mind, since this is on a cruise boat, the news is going crazy, talking about things like rotavirus and norovirus. And norovirus is something that, because you've seen that in the news where the latest with norovirus on the boat. And anyone in the laboratory is kind of like, we've heard about norovirus a lot. This happens on cruise ships all the time, but you're just now mentioning it. So there are these viral infections. So when you're on the cruise boat, don't somehow you end up with norovirus. Usually they scan people pretty well. So that's why before you get on the cruise boat, they ask you, are you having symptoms? Because if you are, they don't want to put you on the boat. And then also you've got some parasites as well. So that you have to kind of keep in mind of when you're traveling. So the thing with me eating, not about anything, but you have to think about Cryptosporidium with water sources, Cyclospora with raspberries. In Jacksonville, we actually had an outbreak of Cyclospora. It was at one of our local wine bars, and this is something that we have to do a specialty stain for in the lab. It's not something we grow up on culture plate, but it's actually something that we'll do a special stain for. When you're in certain locations, look at whether you should drink the water or not, whether there's certain foods you should kind of watch out for. I mean, even though I say, talk about the fact I eat a lot of different things when I travel, I still kind of keep in mind where I am. And if it looks kind of odd, if it's like a bridesmaid situation where it's like gray meat or something, I'm not going to eat it. So if you guys are like, oh gosh, Aaron's eating all sorts of crazy stuff. I'm still watching myself. And then even with as you're traveling, if you do have a fever of some sort, then there's all sorts of things that could potentially cause that. So potentially malaria, dengue, different tick-borne illnesses can kind of occur. So if you start to feel a paralysis moving in your body, look for ticks. But you have to kind of look out for some of those things. If you're in water in South America in some cases, and there's rats in the area, that could even lead to leptospirus. So that can you have to kind of keep an eye out for some of these things. And I love to usually give a talk about this one amoeba called Naegleria fowleri. So it's in usually warmer months when you're diving. It's in hot springs and that kind of thing. So you have to kind of keep. I mentioned that because you have to kind of keep some of those things in mind. Luckily, with public health, they do give you some pretty good warnings. So it's things to kind of keep in mind as you go. So we do look under for a lot of these parasites and some of these bacteria. We do look under the scope. We're looking for things moving. We do know good ways to kind of treat you. So a great example of one of these is we had a patient with strongyloides, so it's this one worm, and they were thinking that the person just had a cold or something. So they did one of the gram stains, and when we peeked under the scope, we saw these little worms crawling around. You don't have to worry about this all the time, but some tip-offs there for strongyloides when we do see that. It's going to be where we're actually able to see the worms crawling on the plate, but we're able to see like trails of bacteria on the plate. So I do feel like I'm sure our buddy Luis Plaza does a whole episode on strongyloides. And if he hasn't, then Luis, I am coming on your show and we will talk about this.